Thank you. Okay, thank you. We're just waiting for Nick McDonald right now. And we brought all of our delegates in because the structure today doesn't allow you to hear anything in the waiting room. So we thought before we started, we get you all in. So as soon as we have Mr. McDonald with us, we will start. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're back from closed meeting. There's we were reporting that it was a legal matter, and now we're ready to move into the open session. I'm just trying to count. Believe we have quorum. Clerk just wants to verify our councillors who are here. So Mayor Harding, I don't think is back yet. But we'll carry, but we're good? Okay. All right. So today's meeting is really to review, as you know, the report from Meridian, and Mr. McDonald is here with us. And the aim today is to get through the recommendations within his report and be able to give direction back to Mr. McDonald and Meridian to prepare the next draft of our OPA. So I just want to highlight that it is noted there that some of the wording will change, be tightened up, whatever. So getting into what I want to call wordsmithing isn't the aim today. And I know we had councillors who wanted to have some input and discussion. I believe that will happen as we go through these recommendations. But once we finish the recommendations, if there is more thoughts, obviously we will entertain those. So that is the structure going forward. So I'm just going to ask Mr. Pink, for the benefit of anybody listening in, just to briefly say where we are right now, and then we will turn it over to our delegates. Mr. Pink.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee, members of the public and staff. Thank you. As the Chair correctly pointed out, we had a public meeting on this official plan amendment, I believe it was on May 28th, earlier this year. At the conclusion of that public meeting, committee members directed that staff produce a report outlining all of the main themes that we've heard through the verbal and written submissions, and provide a planning analysis and recommendation in respect to those themes. As well, several committee members expressed a desire to be able to further discuss the official plan amendment. So we have placed that matter on today's agenda. Mr. McDonald is here, and staff is here obviously to be able to respond to that report. As we know, there are a number of delegates who wish to speak today. Would also like to recognize the submission that we did receive from Ms. Susan Epplett. I believe all councillors were copied on that. In regards to next steps, if committee does provide direction today with respect to those recommendations in the report, staff will return to a future planning committee meeting with a further revised draft official plan amendment that can then be considered for a recommendation. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Pink. So we will have our delegates now. You have 2 minutes to speak. I got my little watch right here. So we're going to hold pretty well to those 2 minutes today. So Mr. Pottow, I believe you're up first. So welcome.
Yeah, I'm going to try and go as fast as I can, Chair Bridgman. Thank you for letting me speak. For some reason, I thought I was going to have 5 minutes, and I prepared for 5 minutes, so I can talk really fast or leave 3/4, 2/3 of it out.
No, you got in under the line. I'm sorry. You had asked to delegate when it was 5 minutes. So.
Well, then I will spare you the inconsideration of talking fast, although I tend to talk fast anyways. I'm Frank Pottow. I live on Wistow Island in Lake Rosseau in the Minett area. I live roughly 1 kilometer from the areas that's under discussion. I want to thank you for holding this meeting, Chair Bridgman, Mayor Harding, and members of council. I also want to thank Director Pink, township staff, and Mr. McDonald, not just for their hard work, but for their excellent work. I really think a lot of improvements have been made. I think there's a lot to like. I wish I was speaking after Mr. McDonald made his presentation, because I don't know if he's going to speak formally to it or not, but I think his report was very well done. I also want to thank Mr. Goldhar and Ms. Busted as representatives of the major landowners, because it's clear that they've made some concessions to try to address what I think are some very real concerns, very valid concerns that we and the members of the community have. And in particular, I note that they, voluntarily suggested reducing by 300 units, roughly the maximum number permitted in the R1 and R2 areas, which are the areas on the far side of Judhaven Road. And I want to come back to that in just a second. One of the areas in Mr. McDonald's report that I think should be highlighted is he mentioned under implementation a recommendation concerning development phasing. And I think that's very important. So I think that that's something you should be taking under consideration and including in the OPA requirement that, phasing has, the addition of a traffic impact study. If there was going to be any increase in boating, I think he's recommending no increase in the docking beyond what's already existing and permitted. And I certainly support that recommendation. I think that's necessary based on the boat impact assessment we had and the very valid concerns over boat traffic safety. But I request that the municipality would also consider a fiscal impact study to determine the short and long-term costs to the community of this development and who will bear those costs. So I think not only, traffic study, but also fiscal study if there needs to be improvements to the road system, for example, or increasing the size of the bridge, at Port Sandfield. I want to come back to the proposal, the voluntary proposal that the primary proponent made about reducing the maximum number of units on the far side of Judd. It's deeply appreciated, and so I don't want to minimize it. And I think I would speak on behalf of the MLA and the Friends of Muskoka, both, saying that we appreciate their patience and the fact that they've worked constructively throughout this process, continue to do so. So, and personally, I'm deeply appreciative of it as a guy who lives, a kilometer away. Having said that, I will say that all the reduction that they proposed was on the far side of Judhaven, away from the lake. And the issue is that there would still be, they would reduce the number of units, the maximum number of units on the far side of Judhaven to 818 units. That's less than the 882 units which they're proposing on the lakeside, the much smaller footprint of land that's already burdened with wetlands and is in a floodplain. So would have a much higher density on the waterfront acreage on the near side of Judhaven Road. And I think it was not just the consensus, but the unanimous view of the Minett Joint Policy Review Steering Committee, which I was very proud to serve and pleased to be of service to the community. I think it was the unanimous view of our committee that the majority of the new units to be developed should be developed away from the lake on the far side of Judhaven. And so the problem with what's been proposed now is 100% of the reduction is being taken away on the far side with no reduction on the near side close to the lake. A different alternative would be to say, do that 50-50. The best alternative, in my opinion, would be to have a commensurate. It was a 26.7% reduction in the units on the far side of Judhaven. If there was also a 26.7% reduction on the units on the lake side of Judhaven, I think that would be the best way to solve the problem. Because what you have in front of you now, just to give you the numbers, and I know I like to talk numbers, and sometimes I think people's eyes glaze over when I do, but there's roughly 365 existing and permitted units of the Marriott, another 55 units at Legacy. So between Legacy and the Marriott, you've got 320 units. If you're going to have 882 units, because there's no reduction in what's proposed on the lakefront on Mr. Goldhar's lands, you're going to end up with 1,200 units, more than 1,200 of the 2,000 units, which means more than 60% of the total units in the area would be on the lakefront side of Judhaven Road. And as I said before, I don't think it's just the Minett steering committee, but I think also township staff and district staff and the consultants thought it would be better to have the majority of the units on the far side of the road in order to reduce the burden on the sensitive waterfront lands, and also as one way to help reduce the very dangerous issue of boat traffic. So one consideration would be if you were to reduce the units on the lake side of Judhaven by a similar amount, 26%, and maybe even add back 150 units on the far side of Judhaven, you would actually end up with, if you added 150 to the lake side, to the far side of Judhaven, you'd go from 818 to 968. And if you did the reduction I talked about, a 26.7% reduction on the lake side, you'd end up with, when you included in the Legacy and the Marriott lands, you'd end up with the same number, 968 on the lake side of Judhaven. So what you'd end up with is almost exactly a 50-50 balance. It would be a total of 1,935 units, almost exactly 50-50 balance between the far side and the lake side. I think that's very important. Again, if for whatever reason that's not possible, or the major landowner that's unacceptable to them, then I would at least ask you to consider doing some allocation of those 300 units that they voluntarily proposed to reduce, maybe doing it 50-50. I'll send this in writing so you can read through this math. I'm sorry I went through so much math on a quick basis, but the other thing I want to talk about is the fact that there is, it really is just about having a plan. I think the only plan that was publicly shared was the one that Ms. Bustard put up in the last meeting back in May. And Mr. McDonald mentions in his report, it is my opinion, at the very least, a concept plan should be produced that covers all the areas before recommending adoption of OPA 56. Now, I don't want to delay this process because I think the owner's been very patient, and we don't want to have them unduly delayed. But I will say this, that what I saw was a very attractive concept plan, but it looked like it only had 500 units, which is less than a third of the 1,700 or 1,900 units we're talking about. And so I'm wondering if
Mr. Pottow, could you speak really quickly now, please? Because I'm going to have to ask you to wrap this up.
I just want to say that I support Mr. McDonald's request for having a concept plan that covers the whole area. I don't know that it has to be a requirement. I'm not a planner, but I think it makes good sense. And then lastly, I want to talk about the boat traffic, because one idea I brought up in the last meeting was the idea of having some kind of limitation on the number of boats that are launched each day or each hour into dry docking. I don't have a bulletproof solution for that, but one idea would be to limit it to no more than one boat per hour launched from dry dockage into the area when it's been observed that the boat traffic is above the capacity of the area. You have a traffic study that tells you that there should be no more than one power boat for each 5 hectares of lake surface. There's 57 hectares of lake surface, which means at times when, or in days when, or maybe the day during the 2-day process, one day before, if there's been more than 11 power boats in the area, you would limit the boat launching to 1 an hour. Again, I don't have this solved in today's 5-minute conversation, but I think it's something I think you should take under consideration, because I think, 1,700 units or whatever the number is, all looking to launch boats at the same time in an area that you already have a report showing is over capacity, I think is an accident waiting to happen. And with that, I will say thank you, and I'm sorry for going over my time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pottow. Okay, and next I have Mr. Richards. Mr. Richards, you have 2 minutes. So, and you're frozen on my screen. I don't know if you're same on everybody else. Mr. Richards, can you hear me? Okay, are we? Everybody's frozen here.
Yeah. We appear to be okay on this side, Madam Chair, and Mr. Richards is on mute.
Sorry, Mr. Richards is which?
He's muted.
Yes, I know. Okay.
No, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Richards, so that's fine. You have 2 minutes.
May I ask first, I think you have it on your screen, how many attendees there are at this time?
Well, we have 23 participants in the meeting at this time.
But that includes the people who are speaking.
Yes.
So we have maybe 15 and maybe
Mr. Richards, Mr. Richards, this is a different format for this meeting because we had to go into closed session. It is not being run as our other planning committee meetings are being run. Only you and our council and staff are part of this meeting. So that's why you're seeing what you're seeing. We brought you all in at the same time because under this format, you wouldn't be able to hear the other speakers speak. And so we thought as a courtesy that we would bring you all in at the same time so you could hear each other's delegation.
Could I just challenge the validity of this presentation to the community? This isn't really a public meeting.
It is not a public meeting.
Thank you. That's all. I just wanted to establish that.
It's being webcast.
And do I have 2 or 5? Because I was one of the first.
You're on the supplementary agenda. You have 2 minutes.
But I was one of the first to apply. What's the who got 2 and who got 5?
Probably going to have to ask the clerk to comment on that, and she's just going to come on now.
Good morning. The agenda was posted, and so those that were listed on the agenda as per our current township policies and procedures, they registered prior to the agenda being posted, so they are allowed 5-minute delegations. The people that registered after the agenda was posted receive, for public comments, receive a 2-minute time slot.
Did I not register before?
Okay, so Mr. Richards, please go ahead.
Okay, I just, as a reminder about this project is big, really big. Cleveland's house best year was in 2002 with 152 units.
So,
And they had about 500 people. The Marriott has 220 units, and in over 10 years, they still have over half of their units unsold. There was very bad planning with the Marriott. It's been a financial construction costs. The new proposal is for 1,700 units, more than 10 times the size of Cleveland's. I don't think people think about that. 10 times the size of Cleveland's. My specific issue, if I only have 2 minutes, is the recommendation regarding staff accommodation to be provided in Minett. Now, this sounds kind of good until you examine it. The Marriott staff have no accommodation, virtually no accommodation on site. They traveling from Bala and Gravenhurst and all over Muskoka because there is no accommodation available in Minett. And here we are saying Minett for accommodation. The Marriott is just an example of bad planning and bad council decisions. The reality is there is no accommodation in Minett, no service land. Virtually all the available land is owned by Mr. Goldhar, which is fine. But let me tell you about a story about our Jamie Shand, who is our post office manager. She was driving until recently for 2 hours a day from Gravenhurst because that was the only accommodation she could find. Recently, she was able to find accommodation in the Minett schoolhouse. And it was a rundown. The site is, well, disgusting, frankly, but it was all that was available. Until, as of the end of July, she has received an eviction notice and her hunt has been starting all over again.
Mr. Richards, Mr. Richards, you're at your 2 minutes. So could you wrap up quickly, please?
What were the planners thinking about accommodation in Minett? It must be not should, not where appropriate, not encouraged, but must be on site. And we do need more involvement of the Minett community. Most people have no idea of what's going on. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. All right, I'm going to ask Ms. Thompson.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Laurie Thompson, and I live at 1 Stepping Stone Island on Lake Rosso. Chair Bridgman, Planning Committee members, thank you for the opportunity to delegate today. Friends of Muskoka and the MLA have reviewed the July 29th Meridian Planning Memorandum and have submitted written comments on behalf of our supporters and members. I will briefly summarize a couple of these points, and I won't repeat what Mr. Pottow has said. First of all, we support the removal of significant non-red leaves lands from OPA 56. Neither studies commissioned by the district and township nor the district growth plan provide evidence of a need for another resort village in Muskoka or significant additional residential housing capacity in the next 25 years. In our opinion, removal of these lands from the resort village represents good planning and is aligned with the desires of the broader community. Secondly, concerning servicing, we support the recommendations, particularly the inclusion of all resort lands in the full service area, which we believe should be mandatory rather than subject to discussions with the landowners. Third, we cannot support flexibility in setbacks and buffers along the water's edge. While arguably applicable for urban and community areas, Minett is neither, and we believe it should be subject to setbacks and buffers applicable to other waterfront resorts in the township. These are vital for both environmental and aesthetic reasons, particularly in RC1 and RC2, where shoreline vegetation should be retained or enhanced as much as possible. There are many existing buildings, such as the marina and several resort units that will presumably be grandfathered, mitigating the need for additional flexibility. Fourth, building heights. We're happy to see this addressed, but cannot support 5-story buildings in Minett. Building height is one of the issues of great importance to our community. Most of our supporters agree that the height of the JW Marriott was a mistake and detracts significantly from the natural feel and character of the Minett area. 90% of respondents to our survey requested heights below the natural tree line and limited to 4 stories. At a minimum, we request that the OPA mandate building heights below the natural tree line as required in the existing official plan. Our goal is to not be able to see buildings protruding above the trees from anywhere on the lake. And the community believes that tall buildings in the waterfront area are inappropriate and totally out of character with the surrounding area. As my time is unfortunately up, I'll let Ken Pierce speak to some of the remaining issues. I'd just like to conclude by saying that I trust that Mr. Goldharm, Ms. Bustard, and their team, guided by council and planning staff, and in consultation with the Minett community, will create a resort in Minett that the community will be proud of and that will be in keeping with the historical and existing low-density character of the area and will be a model of environmental sustainability and stewardship. Thank you for allowing me and Friends of Muskoka and the MLA to be part of this process, and we look forward to the next draft of the OPA.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Newell.
Hi there, Ian Newell, 1043 Sagamo Boulevard on Royal Muskoka Island, just down the road from Minett. I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to have participated in this process more or less from the beginning through the Minett Joint Policy Review Steering Committee and then subsequently on the Minett Working Group. And I'd like to also recognize and appreciate the proponents' involvement and flexibility throughout this process. And I support, by and large, Mr. McDonald's recommended changes to OPA 56. And I see them as a lot of progress on a long journey, and I think we're almost there. Thank goodness. There's just a couple of minor tweaks I would like to suggest for Council's consideration to Mr. McDonald's recommendations. First of all, thank you for recommending to redefine Minett's border to exclude what's called the non-red leaves lands. That I think eliminates a big area of potential confusion, and so that is a very good recommendation in my mind. And appreciate the proponents' willingness to come down almost 300 units. And as Mr. Pottow said, I would respectfully suggest that it would be very impactful if we were able to split that reduction between the waterfront lands and the non-waterfront lands, that would be great. So the only things that I would like to add to that would be the building height, and I would suggest that, as elsewhere in the township, a hard cap of 4 stories, including the mechanical space at the top. Possibly, if there's a prominent building, maybe an exception to 5 for that, but otherwise, I don't think it should be a flexible thing. And that throughout the whole process, setbacks are extremely important. There should be no flexibility there except for grandfathered sites. And tree protection needs to be thoroughly incorporated into the development process. So with those comments, I will sign off here and say thank you to council and everyone involved in this process for all of your hard work. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newell. Ms. Bustard.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see everyone. Paula Bustard, representing Cleveland's House. I will keep my comments very brief. Thank you very much to Mr. McDonald for all of his hard work and for all the work of the township. We are in support of the recommendations, and we look forward to continuing to work with all stakeholders. In regards to some of the comments made, the density reduction, we're trying to obviously respond to the concerns raised by the community, and in working with Mayor Harding, we felt that the reduction was appropriate and something that we could work within. The allocation of the units, I don't think further reallocation from the different zones is possible for us to support at this time. We started with significant reductions along the waterfront early on in this process. And in regards to the height reduction, we are absolutely fine with a cap of 5 stories, but we would ask that we work through the definition of how that gets defined, because there is a lot of elevation changes throughout the site. But we do think the 5-story height limitation is appropriate for the site. In regard to the comments about setbacks, I still would respectfully disagree with the position of Friends of Muskoka. I do believe that the OPA does require flexibility on setbacks, because the required technical studies to determine setbacks and the floodplains have not been completed as part of this exercise. And those will absolutely be necessary for the rezoning application. And there will be a full, robust technical review by the district and by the township and by our consultants. And certainly, I think that is the appropriate mechanisms for those setbacks to be established. And with that, I think just the 2 comments that Mr. McDonald made. Yes, we are working on concept plans for the totality of the lands, and it's our expectation that any rezoning application would have to look at a broader concept plan. And lastly, I will just clarify that our concept plan does show some development on R1, but he is correct that there's nothing shown on R2. And I think the floodplain mapping, similar to my other comment, that we totally acknowledge that technical studies, flood mitigation, all of the technical components of it will be part of any detailed rezoning application that we submit. But thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions, and we continue to work with all stakeholders as we bring this to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bustard. Mr. Pierce.
Yes, thank you. I agree with recommendation number 9 in the Meridian memo. There should be a strengthening of the language. Is where appropriate really appropriate, I guess, is the question. Unfortunately, council doesn't decide what is appropriate. In fact, the applicant does, or ultimately LPAT. Clarity and strength of language is critical. For example, we keep talking about setbacks. I'm not sure why we need flexibility. There's basically 3 properties that we're talking about: Legacy, Marriott, and Cleveland's House, not hundreds. And their plans are known. I would tend to disagree with Ms. Bustard about the floodplains. What we're talking about is side lot setbacks and setbacks from the shoreline, not where floodplains are. That segues nicely into the memo under other matters, floodplain. The rules in Ontario are pretty simple. You can't build on a floodplain. There should also be an appropriate, and I use that word, a specified or specific setback from the floodplain for building and being able to build. The district memo by Summer Valentine in part 6 said it best. To paraphrase, she strongly recommended to council flood-prone areas be in a restricted designation with detailed policies. Right now, there are no policies. There is language about an area, a limitation of use restriction, but it's essentially meaningless without policies. The next point is memo recommendation number 2. We don't feel the need for a further public meeting, but rather support the second option that Mr. McDonald put forward, that he said he was fine with either one, that affected non-red leaves property owners be contacted directly. We don't want to see the process delayed any further. We're on around 3 years now. There's strong turnout at the first public meeting, and I think it's more efficient to contact them directly. The last point is the memo has 9 recommendations and addresses a few other points. There's also many other important matters for council to address. We respectfully request council consider our other recommendations in our May 28th submission, many of which are from old OPA 34 and should be not be controversial. As well, we're in favor of many of the points raised in the district memo that Summer Valentine prepared. And we would point out that as just a couple of examples, the 9 recommendations deal with 9 very important matters, but there's a couple for sure that are very important: percent commercial versus non-accommodation, and what happened to the commercial criteria. As we've heard, if they're in an appendix, they're of no consequence whatsoever. So those need to find their way in, we think, into the actual plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pierce. Okay, so that concludes our delegates. So we're going to actually move them back out of the meeting, so you can back on YouTube to hear the rest of it. This now turns over to our planning committee for discussion and consideration of the recommendations. So Mr. McDonald, there you are. See you there. Welcome.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. And I'm going to suggest we'll start at recommendation 1. Do you wish to say a few words about it before I open it up?
I'm not sure I need to say too much. I think the memo is pretty self-explanatory. The recommendations are pretty clear. I'm happy to answer any questions on them as opposed to providing a presentation. I know it's already 20 to 11, so I think that might be the best use of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to read recommendation 1. It is recommended that the permitted unit count in the R1 and R2 designations be reduced from 1,117 to 818, and that the total number of units permitted be 2,020 in an updated version of OPA 56. And I can see that Councillor Jaglowitz has his hand up. So please go ahead, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to speak to this recommendation. And I also would like to thank the delegations. I think they were very good comments there. I'm very appreciative of this offer of reducing the density. However, I believe it's been reduced in the wrong area. And I'll get into later when we talk about a full concept plan and phasing. But I would like to suggest that this would be much more meaningful if it was on the waterfront, and would like to suggest that that's where it be. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other comments on this? So what I am going to ask is, Councillor Nishikawa.
Sorry, it's hard not being at my desk. I'm still struggling with this as we don't have an application in front of us. So while we're trying to put things in place, I'm pretty much struggling if we're just going to end up doing this again. So mostly I'm just really concerned that we don't have an application in front of us, and I'm not sure that I'm prepared to move anything forward today.
Mayor Harding.
Thank you. I am prepared. I think if you wanted that, we will vote on each recommendation accordingly. I think as you read that resolution, I am supportive of this. My concern would be without a change to the official plan, an application ahead of us allows the developer to develop to 4,200 units, or particularly at that point. So I think we need to set our goal for the framework, and then the developer would be coming in under our goals with an application that would meet our official plan. So I don't think we're going to have to do this again, as well as the developers at the table, so to speak. So I appreciate, and again, my conversations with Mr. Goldhar over the past couple of years, and with Ms. Bustard as well, appreciate where we have gone, and the reduction, if you will, in unit count. In general terms, we are more than 50% reduced. I think that's a significant win, and I appreciate all the community's comments. People have worked hard at this. The one thing I will also say, and I know, we all talk about that it was changed in 2007. Prior to 2007, the property was zoned for over 3,000 units. So again, I appreciate where we have come to, and I would like to get this out the door sooner than later, and continue to get additional feedback on the totality. And then once we have set the framework, then look at the exact zoning schedules and bylaws that would be required, if you will, from the development plan under our official plan. So, and remember, Mr. Goldhar has been at the table with us in developing this official plan. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. And through you, I must admit, I'm a little bit stuck on process here, and maybe echo a little bit of what Councillor Nishikawa said. If we break any big organized plan down into its, into finite parts and deal with them one at a time in isolation, none of these individually looks particularly, death defying, but it's only when they come together in the aggregate that we really know whether we put something together that we want. So I want to figure out how, once we sign off on this, vote on this issue, how do we move this thing forward, knowing that at the ultimate outcome, there isn't going to be a trade-off down the road that we wish we had made. I'm just not comfortable with this process right now, because I think it's helpful to have it broken down to bite-sized pieces so we know what the issues are. But again, each individual issue on its own isn't a deal breaker, perhaps, or maybe it is. But it's in the aggregate where we have a plan we're comfortable with or not.
So, Councillor Kelly, these recommendations are going to allow Meridian to come up with the next draft, which will come back to us. And so I believe that we need to get this moving forward. We're not, what we recommend today is not the end result, but it has to be broken down into pieces to get this moving forward. So I am really hopeful that we'll make our recommendations today, and then it's going to come back to us as a draft, and that will be tightening of the words, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my input on it. I think in order to move it forward at all, we have to break it down at this point and give some direction on where it's going to go. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Recommendation one, I think I'd be supportive if we could remove the words that R1 and R2 designations and just keep it open. Supportive of the reductions down, but I don't want to be tied to just reductions in those two areas. Thank you.
Councillor Zawitz.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, if I might direct a question to Nick. Good morning, Nick. I wonder, sir, to use Councillor Kelly's words in the aggregate, could you comment on the recommendation, on your recommendation as it relates to drafting in what we've heard from the Friends of Muskoka, Mr. Pottow, and others today? Can you just wax poetic for me for a moment or two on how inclusive you believe where we are where we are at right now with all of that?
Certainly, I can do that. That's a pretty wide open question, so I'll try to wax poetic in a short manner. I guess the way I look at it is the current official plan as it sits now establishes the principle of developing over 4,000 units on the property. And I was prepared to recommend a reduction based on the most recent, I guess the second most recent proposal put forward by the proponent. And then the proponent indicated that they're willing to reduce it by a further 299. So I'm certainly in support of that as well. In terms of the broader comment about how all this gets implemented, as I indicated later in my memorandum, I want to strengthen the implementation policies in this amendment to make it very clear on what actually has to happen next before anything else can happen. And that's a development phasing plan, that's a master environmental study. All kinds of things need to be done before anything can happen, with all of that being the subject of this council's review through a zoning bylaw amendment application process, which is a statutory process subject to a public meeting and which can be appealed by the proponent or any party. So I think there are a lot of protections built into this. And what we're doing through this amendment is essentially establishing an upset limit of what the township is prepared to consider in terms of units. It may actually be less based on the technical studies that end up getting completed, but it can't be more. So that's what this amendment's about.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I wonder if I might have a supplemental.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. And I wonder if I could direct it to Director Pink in terms of David, what you've just heard from Nick and what you've been witnessing this morning, and obviously being in receipt of the Meridian recos that you're suggesting we approve today. Could you add your comment to that?
Director Pink.
Thank you, through you, the chair. I'm not sure, I'm certainly happy to answer any more specifics if you wish to provide, but I would just echo Mr. McDonald's comments. You know, that the recommendations, if they are approved, we can go back, and I'm happy to work with Mr. McDonald to produce a revised draft OPA to capture those recommendations and what we've heard today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Pink. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to support the suggestion put forward by Councillor Roberts that this be amended to be a reduction, but not necessarily in the R1 and R2 designations. And I'd like to also, and part of my reasoning for that is that I believe I heard in the delegations that this came about with some discussions with the mayor. And I just wondered what authority the mayor had to have those discussions. I think it's up to this committee and ultimately council to deal with this. And I think my sense of the majority of council would want an overall reduction, not necessarily an R1 and R2. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. And just to Councillor Jaglow's question, throughout this entire process and in many applications, there are individuals who talk to individual councillors when we have properties that need a variance, asking for that councillor's opinion, comment. In developments such of this nature, Mr. Goldhar reached out to me originally over 2 years ago to sort of get my own personal opinion. I am one vote, as we all know, of a council of 10. I have zero authority to guide or direct, but I can tell you unequivocally in every conversation I've had with Ms. Bustard and Mr. Goldhar is that we have to continue to reduce the number of units, that it's not good enough. At the end of the day, it's council's decision, but I've heard quite clearly the community's perspective. I've heard quite clearly council's perspective. And that perspective was provided to Mr. Goldhar and Ms. Bustard throughout this process. And that is all. Ultimately, again, right before us now is that of council's decision. Do we like these recommendations or not? I will tell you my personal opinion in all of this, And two, we're not ready to decide on this yet, and we're not ready to decide on this yet. And I think Mr. Pink can probably comment. If Mr. Goldhar was to come to us today to develop 4,000 units based on the current zoning on the property, we do not have the ability to say no. That's not a threat. That's not anything. That is what the Township of Muskoka Lakes has granted in the past this property, the authority to develop over 4,000 units. I encourage council to move a significant reduction of less than half of the development forward with tweaks and changes as we require and need, but understanding that tomorrow the developer could be coming in with us and we cannot say no. So they're at the table, they're working with us today. And I believe that our consultant has made some additional little language changes and recommendations. And I'll be honest, I support those going forward. And I would like to move this forward and change the official plan, hopefully not to be appealed by the developer or other members of the community. That would be my ultimate goal. So I will support the recommendation as worded.
Thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz, your hand is, I think, still up. You want a supplemental? Councillor Jaglowitz, I can't hear you.
I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties here. I just wanted to also indicate that I too have had a conversation with Mr. Goldhar, and I'd like towards the end of this conversation, because it's general in nature, like to relay that to the committee. I agree with the mayor, and I apologize if I inferred something. Every member of council is prepared to talk to proponents, and I would just like to have the opportunity to be able to relay my conversation towards the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Well, I really want to stay focused on recommendation 1 right now and talking about that. So Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. And through you, just a follow up to my earlier comment. I'm prepared to support recommendation 1, but I would ask for the amendment that I think Councillor Edwards and Councillor Jaglowitz mentioned, which is to delete the reference to R1 and R2. And we'll sort out later on where the 300 units will be pulled.
Okay, thank you. Could I, Councillor Mazan?
Thank you, and through you, I'd like to support the idea brought forward by Councillor Roberts as well. Thank you.
Okay, so can I get a nodding of heads here on that from the other councillors? So I've got a black screen in front of me for everyone.
Madam Chair, just a question, if I may.
Yes.
A question, I think, to Nick, our consultant. You were specific in the reduction in R1 and R2 designations, and I'm just wondering why you were specific in those specific categories versus the general, which is being proposed today. Might help my decision in supporting that or not.
Mr. McDonald?
Through you, yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Bridgman. Basically, as I indicated, I was prepared to support the higher number with the splits as presented at the public meeting. The only reason you're seeing a change is as a consequence of the proponent making a specific request to reduce the number of units in the R1, R2. So that's why the recommendation is worded exactly as it is. I was prepared to recommend the numbers that were in the draft OPA presented at the public meeting with the 300 additional units. So this is to some extent proponent driven in terms of the reduction, but I'm prepared to support it without the reduction or as it's proposed. And Ms. Bustard indicated this morning that they're not prepared to reduce the number of units in the shoreline facing areas, and I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm I know Councillor Roberts put on the table that we remove the R1 and R2 designations on this. I unfortunately can't see anybody's face here in the chambers. I was just hoping I could get a bit of a straw vote on how many supported that. Councillor Edwards?
Yes, thank you. I would like to support Councillor Roberts on this. It's not written in stone. We can come up, we can talk. There might be one or two changes made. And that I compliment the applicant for reducing it and that, but and I think if it goes to the 2020 and that at least we can talk about it without it going to the OMB or LPAT and that. So I would support it with or without it and that. But I think at this time, if to get it through, if the other councillors want R1 and R2 removed, I would support that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I am getting a definite sense that we would like to remove the R1 and R2 designations at this point in time for the next draft. And so are we doing individual motions on each one of these? Our clerk is just, we have black screens here, so we can't do votings by hand here in the office. I'm going to be really happy when we get back to real meetings. Just give us a second for the technical side. Okay, so our clerk can actually see everybody on her phone, and so I am going to suggest that we all raise our Councillor Nishikawa. I think you have one more thing to say here.
I just wanted to let you know, my opinion has altered since Nick had spoken. And I would not be in favor of, I would stick with the recommended split as was written in the draft. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. And I guess, you know, our consultant with the developer has suggested the reduction would be in the R1 and R2, or sorry, in the R1 and R2. We may want it somewhere different. My gut feeling is that we can pass it without nomenclature or zones, just as an overall reduction. But, you know, we haven't heard from the developer specifically on our request to move them back. With the exception that I think Ms. Buster did say that they would like to retain the waterfront development rights as proposed. They are in support of the recommendation specifically of Mr. McDonald. I think it's going to become moot, and I think at next draft and iteration, my gut feeling would be that it may be coming back in, but happy to continue the dialogue. Let's just move this forward. If a gross reduction, then it's a gross reduction. We'll talk about it future, I bet.
I agree, Mayor Harding. Councillor Jaglowitz.
As vice chair of the meeting, I have a full screen, so if I can help with the hands, let me know. I disagree with the mayor. I think it's important that R1 and R2 be removed.
No, I believe Mayor Harding said he would support that at this time, Councillor Jaglowitz, in order to have it move forward. He can correct me if that's the case. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. The reason I'd like to see R1 and R2 out of it is there might be a reduction in the future with the floodplain mapping, and I don't want to handicap the actual developer. If he found out there was 10 or 15 units that he couldn't build down there, so this would leave the flexibility. I'm not trying to leave it. I'm just trying to leave it as flexible as possible. That's why I will support it without it. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to suggest that we deal with this and then we'll get on to the next recommendation. And I believe that what we are looking at is removing the R1 and R2 designations from this recommendation. So this recommendation will stand with the exception of R1 and R2 designations being the reduction area. So I'm going to call a vote. All in favor of that? I can see my screens again, sure. Which I don't.
I can too.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's
Perfect.
okay. We can see everybody again for a moment. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to non-read leaves. I don't think there needs to be. I'm just trying to find the actual recommendation. I don't think there needs to be much comment on this. I happen to know one of the major landowners in the non-read leaves area. He was happy with whatever happened. Told me I could say that. And so I believe that we're all in agreement, as the recommendation says, we'll exclude these lands from Minett, and that rather than have a public meeting, we can approach the owners individually. So is there any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor? Madam Clerk, you're good? Okay, thank you. That carries. The next is servicing, and the recommendation being that pre-servicing servicing schedule be added to the plan and an appendix showing the same in the township official plan, full service area and future service areas. The extent of those lands are all lands owned by Ontario Limited and the lands in the Marriott designation and the legacy designation. And that the schedules of the OPA 56 be updated to show the location of the proposed water and wastewater management area. So Mayor Harding, you'd like to comment?
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick comment, because if I'm not mistaken, the legacy property in particular was out of the serviced area in its original plan. And just for clarity, we are now recommending that that is included in the serviced area. So I know the Marriott would be forced to hook up, and I've already had that discussion with our district public works department. But once the plant would be functional and up and ready, we would be forcing the Marriott, or sorry, Legacy to hook up as well. That's correct?
That's my understanding. Mr. McDonald? Yes.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And we actually met with the representative of Legacy and did mention that, and no concerns were expressed. I think over the longer term, everything in Minett should be on full services. That's the long range plan, and I recognize that there is an interim servicing solution there now, but over the long term, I think it's in the public interest for it to be connected.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you. I have a question and a comment, and I haven't read in detail the OPA on this subject, but my previous reading was that there was an option there, that public services were not mandatory. It could go either way. So I assume this recommendation would be prefaced that if public services are utilized, then this would apply, but it would not apply the other way. And I just, so I see Nick nodding, so maybe he can respond. And I still, regardless of that, I still favor private servicing for phase one of this development, but thank you.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes, I will confirm that if public services are developed, that Legacy would be required to connect, just like the JW Marriott.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All right, then I'm going to ask for a vote on recommendation 3. All those in favor? Good. Okay, thank you. Setbacks from the water edge is our next one. Recommendation 4, recommended that there be some flexibility. I'm going to shorten this a little for the people listening in. on shoreline buffers and building setbacks, but the language of the OPA 56 be strengthened to indicate that such reductions are to be further considered through the implementing master planning process and are only permitted subject to the township's approval of these master plans. And the district plan would have to be amended to parallel this. So that's where we are with this one. Anyone have any comments on this? Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't agree with this. I think I subscribe to the fact that our waterfront is precious and the setbacks should be respected. So I will not be voting for this.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Harding.
Thank you. What I like about this is that some of the language be strengthened, indicating certain reductions further considered in a master planning process. I was fortunate, was in a meeting earlier this week with our committee chairs, and heard from some of those individuals that to help move some process, we really need to delegate more. We need to have our staff involved. We have trained professionals, and I look forward. I think this is an opportunity. I'm not sure council can provide specific value, and there is always going to be, as a master plan comes out for this area, I think there's an opportunity here to continue to move this forward without having to have an official plan amendment, and being duly unrestrictive. Our staff, our council certainly know the recommendations, and I look forward to a little bit of flexibility, certainly not a carte blanche to build what you want. And I don't think anybody's recommending that. So I am supportive.
Councillor Kelly.
This is one area where I frankly don't have any appetite for flexibility. I think this is pretty much a fundamental principle of our waterfront development and the risk of waterfront overdevelopment. And so I will be following the recommendation of Councillor Jaglowitz. I won't be supporting this as it's presently set out.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments? Well, I'm going to then ask for a vote. So basically, if you support this recommendation, there'll be flexibility. And if you don't support it, it will, the next draft will have no flexibility in terms of the buffer. So, all right, so recommendation 4. I think Mayor Harding wants to speak first.
Thank you very much. And maybe to Mr. McDonald, to where we are today with our current, and again, I'm trying to base it on the current zoning and any kind of flexibility within that, and just your perspective on official plans. We've already got a lot of prescribed, I believe, restrictions on this property. No question, we all want to protect our waterfront, and that is my #1 goal. But where we're at today with the current official plan in Minett, and quote unquote flexibility or lack of controls, and what you would be recommending to put in place, with your recommendation that's before us right now.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes, so through you, Chair Bridgman, basically putting numbers in official plans is always problematic. The more numbers you put in there, the less flexibility you have. And if there is no flexibility and you look at a master plan that makes eminent sense, but the buffer is 13 meters, then an official plan amendment is required. And I don't think that serves any purpose. So my thinking here is that I fully support the idea of buffers and setbacks. This area is a little bit different, and I'd like to see a master planning process undertaken to really do a deep dive into that. And it would only be through that process that the reductions would be considered. So I'm just leaving the door open for that to happen later. I'm not suggesting it will, or it should, or it's a good idea at this point. But I do want to provide the developer with some flexibility without having to waste 8 months changing the official plan to reduce a setback from 20 to 14 meters or some number. That's really the idea here. You retain ultimate control, and that's how we would write the policy, such that you would have to vote as a council when you have that master plan and rezoning application in front of you, in support or not in support, based on the information you have. And I think that's a much more prudent course of action.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, and through you, I certainly wouldn't support having housing right down to the waterfront, but you know, lookouts and other attractions could be down there. Through you, Nick, could you give us some idea of things that we could expect to see that would need this flexibility?
Well, thank you. I might be speaking out of turn because we don't have a master plan in front of us. We have a concept plan with some ideas, but I do anticipate changes to it. Quite frankly, I don't anticipate housing within 15 meters or 20 meters of the waterfront. I'm thinking of wellness centers. I'm thinking of lookouts. I'm thinking of boardwalks. I'm thinking of things that really support the function of the village core in particular. It is supposed to be a fairly intense area. And if you think of any urban area, there are buildings and things happening right up to the water. So I'm not suggesting that we would be walling anything off. All I'm thinking is that there should be some flexibility for some of the non-residential components of the development within a certain distance of the shoreline. And again, I think I would build protections into the amendment to make it very clear that it would be subject to council's approval for any reductions. I should note as well, and just to complicate things perhaps, that they do have some permissions and rights currently to rebuild things and perhaps expand things. So that's a completely separate discussion, but that would all come out through the master planning process.
Okay, so Mr. McDonald, you could actually put in that there would be non-housing if this recommendation went through.
I would certainly be in favor of recommending that, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I have some concerns about the flexibility as well. I believe it was the subdivision called Hannah's Landing in Port Carling that we actually came up with a plan and said this is what it's going to be. And I think we could work something out with the developer on it, get the concept plans and work it out there. If I remember correctly, we even got some further setbacks from residential and that. So you know, I'm very, very cautious of just saying, oh well, let's be flexible. I think we should see the concept and then approve it at that point. That's all I'm saying in that with it. So I really am concerned, and the mayor's right. We have staff that can do it, but we're the ones who answer to the public, and they're our boss. And that so that you know, we have to listen to what the public want as well. And our new strategic plan says environment first. So you know, I'm very concerned about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. Just to clarify again what I heard from Mr. McDonald, we're not giving up any control. We're not actually delegating any specific change to the setbacks or buffers by allowing some flexibility, but we're offloading it, if you will, to a master plan for the area, which still would require council's involvement. The public would still be involved. It just wouldn't take an 8-month or a year planning amendment to do so. And we all know that sometimes amendments or minor amendments or whatever to buffers or whatever make more sense to us. Trying to plan out all these lands at this particular time, and Councillor Edwards brought up, you did, it took a long time to get through Hannah's Landing, but we still don't even have a development there at this particular time. And if they did want to put a boardwalk that makes more sense, again, it would still have to come towards council. So again, I'm in support of this because I think we already have the vegetative buffers. We already have the plans in place. It's just changing it for an official plan amendment to a master plan. And I agree with implementing a master plan in this area.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Jaglowitz.
I think others were ahead of me, Chair.
Okay, it looked to me on my screen that it was you, but Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. Based on some of the feedback and input from Nick, I would actually be able to support this if the flexibility were to apply only to non-accommodation type units. So draw a hard line on anything that's intended to house or put somebody up, but boardwalks, docks, lookouts, that kind of stuff, non-accommodation development, I would agree it should be allocated to the master planning process, and we'll look at it later on as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Councillor Kelly, just to sort of just expressing my exact feelings. Non-habited space, no, not allowed. I'd also like to see, like the building offer recommendation number 9. I would like to see, which it says we need clearer strengthening of language and expectations. So maybe in this area, I would like Mr. McDonald to give the examples, like we do in a lot of our zoning, of what would be allowable within this zone. Thank you.
So I'm a little unclear. You mean in terms of recommendation 4, what the wording would be?
But I'm recommending what would be allowed: boardwalks, outlooks, etc. Examples.
Okay, you want a direct listing of what would be allowed?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get, okay, Mr.
Yes,
McDonald,
thank you.
you'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think the best way to deal with that is, obviously we're having a conversation today. It's pretty clear what everyone's expectations are. So when you get the draft next time, I will put in examples of exactly what would be considered acceptable, and then you'd vote on that. But I don't think we can come up with a list right now on the fly, but I'd like to think about that. And I will do that for the next draft. But it will not include accommodation as per the direction I think we're going to be getting today.
Hey, Councillor Jaglowitz. Councillor Jaglowitz, you're on mute.
Sorry, this is a slippery slope. And this is just an example of where we have to be careful. ROP has to say what we need. And I'll tell you the story that Director Hastings told me, and it refers to a particular lake. And she said, Frank, if you don't want cottages on that lake, your official plan has to say no cottages on that lake. And here's an example. So if we give flexibility in the OPA, and then it comes, even with council's approval, and it comes to council for approval and council turns it down, then the proponent can appeal it to LPAT based on the fact that our OP allows it. So I think we have to be very specific here. And I know that violates the principle of some official plans, but I'm in favor of no flexibility, or if there is, it's very well defined. Thank you.
Well, I think what we've been talking about is defining the flexibility very well. I'm just trying to, Mr. McDonald, because we're going to be voting on this. Councillor Jaglowitz, I think, just said if it's really well defined, he could support it. So could you just comment on that, please?
Certainly. So I would suggest some modifications to this, and I'm just going to say it as a layperson, and we can figure out what the wording should be. But OPA 56 continue to provide some flexibility with respect to shoreline buffers and building setbacks as it relates to non-accommodation related uses. and that the language of the OPA be strengthened to make it very clear that such reductions are only to be considered by council through a future process. And I would write it in a way that would make it very difficult for someone to make a case that somehow we've opened the door, then closed it. I'm opening the door a crack. And if you say no, then that's no. And I will write it in such a way that it'll make it very easy and very easy to defend. So if you can leave that with me, I can certainly do that.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards?
I think I could actually support it if it's written that way. And when it comes back to us, we can always, and that send it back if we don't like what's in it. So I will support it, and that if Mr. McDonald can tighten it up, because we don't want any wiggle room in these things. Thank you.
Okay. So I don't see anybody else wishing to comment. So if I could ask us to vote on basically what Mr. McDonald just told us he will do if we support him. So all in favor? Madam Clerk, you good? Oh, hands up again, and I'll help you out on this. Yeah, some of them are frozen, right? Councillor Kelly, could you put?
It's unanimous
frozen.
from my screen. Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you. It was frozen on our screen. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break. I think we have a hard stop at 1 o'clock, I gather, Mr. McDonald. And so let's take a 5-minute break right now, and then we can carry on right through till 1 p.m. So we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, let's get everybody back. We just wait until we have our quorum here. At the moment, I can see everybody, so that's good. All right, Madam Clerk, we do have a quorum. You're good? Good to go? Okay, great. Okay, the next recommendation is that the building heights be up to 5 stories. And this includes the electrical equipment. So any comments on this? Councillor Edwards.
Yes, I would like a height limit rather than stories. Because we had one where somebody was trying to get around it in the Bell area by putting a 20-foot ceiling in and saying they need it for health reasons and everything else like that, but just to get the heights up. I would like to see it just and that capped at a height. So if you can get it in that way, that's fine. But I think it should be height rather than stories.
Okay, well, who's next? According to my screen, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair. This is another area that's so wide open. 5 stories where? Right on the waterfront? Anywhere they want? I don't think that's appropriate. I think later on when we get to concept plan, phasing, master plan, maybe that's the time to talk about this. But in the meantime, if we're going to have, say, 4 or 5 stories, we have to say where it's allowed. We can't just say it's allowed anywhere, in my view. Thank you.
Councillor Hayes.
Thank you. I'm going to agree with both Councillor Jaglowitz and Councillor Edwards. I believe at our last discussion, we had said that the bottom of the window ledge would be at the height of our tallest ladder in our fire department. And that would be allowed for safety and access. And I would not want to see anything larger than a 2-story for at least 1 tier or 2 tiers back from the water's edge. I think it's something that should be hidden in with the topography. And I think that that's something that we'll have to take a good look at in the master plan. But at least if we give them an idea of what we're looking for, then the master plan can develop in a way that would receive more, would be more pleasing to council.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Harding.
Thank you. And again, I do struggle with the numbers. If it's a 5-story building, again, is it 12-foot ceilings on each floor or not? So I am supportive of a height restriction specifically. With that said, there may be one building tucked into the corner that does make potentially a feature building, draw attention the way. I don't understand that. I think that's where a specific, I'll use the word site plan, but a development plan may go forward. And I'm not sure, but I'm assuming that, Paul is still on the line with us here, but hopefully if we were to say the height is limited to 50 feet, then we would have a better idea. And if you need one building to go to 60 feet, tell us where that is, what it's going to look like, and we can write that in. But certainly don't need 5 towering buildings like Red Leaves or the Marriott right now across the whole ridge line. I think that's something we're trying to avoid. So Nick, I think you got your work cut out for you to put some numbers associated and potentially get away from the number of stories.
Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, if I can respond to that quickly, it's a pretty common discussion about stories versus using numbers. And the rule of thumb in the industry is that the first story is always 4 meters and every story above it is 3 meters each, generally speaking. So if we did the math for 5, that means 16 meters or 53 feet. Keeping in mind that the top story, the mechanical has to be included, which oftentimes means you really only get 4 because the mechanical sometimes exceeds that height. So if you're looking for a number, I'd suggest 16 meters.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Sorry about that. It was interesting when the Red Leaves was done and we had the 70-foot height request, which was permitted, but not for the whole building. And again, without having plans and things like that in front of us, I'm a little bit concerned. I'm even not sure. I do believe that we should be having a number, a height restriction number. And I think that without an application forward, we just have to pick a number out of the air. But I will, if those may remember, when we brought an application forward in Bala for a seniors complex, and there was a small tower in the middle, and that particular property was, it actually, the elevations from Highway 169 as well as Maple Avenue, the elevation dropped more than 10 feet, which really adjusted the overall appearance. And we have to consider that. So that's where I'm a little bit challenged, where we can put a number in place when we don't know what the topography in the area is like. That challenges me. I would be comfortable with a 50-foot number. Again, sorry, didn't do the metrics, but that to me is, I think, reasonable from other things that have been built in the area. I would agree that I wouldn't want, for instance, what occurred in the wharf in Gravenhurst, because it did exceed the tree line in those 3 buildings. So again, I would like a number, but I really look forward to a plan coming forward, and because possibly my number would be adjusted from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. The problem, there's a real problem that I have here, and that is 50 feet, 60 feet in however many meters that converts to. I don't think any one of us, or at least if any one of us, can imagine what that's going to look like right on our sacred waterfront, especially if it's more than one building. I can't imagine what it's going to look like, but it doesn't sound good to me. I think maybe the best measure of height is the tree line, the prevailing tree line in the immediate development, so that it doesn't stick up and above. And I don't know if we have 50-foot pines there or what we have. And by tree line, I mean natural tree line, not the bell tower tree line, because they're higher. But at the end of the day, we want this to reflect our concern for the waterfront development, the density, for the environment. And if it becomes a Monopoly style village, playing Monopoly with those little cubes to bring your boat in and show it off, we're going to be sadly disappointed, and we're going to offend most of our constituents. This is not where I actually don't even know. Do we have other comparable sized buildings? That's my first question. And if so, where? And I realize Red Leaves probably is an exception that stands out, I would point out, among all of the others. And number 2, why 5 stories? Is there some kind of building efficiency that comes with that size of a structure? I'm just curious. I don't know the answer to that, but keeping it below the prevailing tree line would also encourage the developer to leave the trees and standing and on site as well. And I think that might be the best way to mask what's going on there.
Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments to help with this conversation. I agree. It's really difficult to say, yeah, that makes sense or doesn't make sense because we don't have any kind of a master plan in front of us. But what the amendment didn't do in the last draft is provide any direction at all. And I'm thinking it needs to provide some direction for a master planning process. And I'm suggesting 5 stories. There are certain efficiencies in 5-story buildings that you don't achieve in 4-story buildings, particularly if there are elevators involved. You can also build 5-story buildings out of wood these days based on changes to the building code. So there are some efficiencies there. There are other policies embedded through the amendment which are very well, and they could be clearer, I admit, but they direct at low risers near the waterfront. You have to look at the tree lines when you're looking at everything. So there is quite a bit of direction in here, but I'm getting the sense that more direction is better. I'm still thinking we should fix a number, whether it's 5 or 4, I guess it's going to be coming from this committee. I think 5 can work. But I would also suggest that I include in here a requirement through the master planning process for a height plan so that there is a real look at all of the building heights through the master planning process and a real understanding of where they fit in with tree lines, with rock outcrops, with views from the water, with all kinds of views taken from different places. So you get a true sense of what's going on. And I can make that a requirement of the master planning process to give this council some comfort when they get the full package that it actually works. But I agree, we're dealing with the abstract here. It's very hard. But I think we need a number because we need to provide that clarity. And I think that's what we should accomplish today if we can.
Mayor Harding.
Thank you. And I appreciate the concept about the tree line. My concern, again, let's take the Cleveland House property. The lookout rock, which might be between the 5th and 6th hole, I think it is, on the golf course, would have been sort of north of the old laundry facility on the west side of Judhaven. If you were to tuck the building in front of there, you might end up with an 80-foot high building because the trees on top of the rock are so much higher than you. So I like putting a height restriction on it. If Red Leaves was at 75 feet, that's like 22 meters. That's ridiculous. And I don't think we'd be contemplating that. You know, our residential waterfront zone is 10.7, almost 11 meters in height. So I think, you know, Nick's comment of a 16 meter is an appropriate height, and then factor in a height building plan, if you will, to keep things under the tree line. So I can buy into that number and see how it's designed going forward. Let's just pick that number.
Okay, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. The height of Cleveland House as it is, if they were building it the way they built the Windermere House, rebuilt it exactly the same. If it was a little bit higher, I could go with that. Everything else, I wouldn't go over 50 feet, and that would keep it under the tree line. And that when you're at the lower end of Lake Ross and look up, all you see is the red leaves sticking out like a sore thumb. It looks better when you're closer, believe it or not. And I don't want to see that again in the lake. There was a mistake made at that time, and we should not bring that forward. And the closer to the shoreline, the lower the height. And I take it under advisement that Councillor Hayes said about our longest ladder for the fire department reaching up to the windowsill. So that should be kept in mind as well. But I would not go higher than 50 feet.
Hey, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. McDonald, and then I have a comment, if I can do it in 2 parts. Nick, I wonder if you'd explain to me the master plan. We're using that term. Does that, let's say that a master plan has to come to council or committee. What authority does council have to approve or not approve that master plan? Doesn't it have to go back to the OP? And so you're saying the master plan can afford us some comfort because they come forward with something, but then do we have the right to do anything about it? And then after that, I have a comment.
Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, through you, Chair Bridgman, great question. A master plan is not a statutory plan. It's not a Planning Act document. But what facilitates what sets up the need to submit a master plan is the application for rezoning, which is a Planning Act process. And the way this amendment's being set up is that in order to implement this amendment, there's a need to change the zoning that applies to all of these lands. And the zoning will not be approved by this council until it is satisfied that all of the things I've laid out in this amendment that need to be satisfied, master planning, phasing, servicing, the height plan we're talking about, is all done to your satisfaction. If there's one element that's not to your satisfaction, the zoning doesn't get approved, the master plan doesn't get implemented. If the master plan is to your satisfaction and you approve the zoning, then the zoning is approved in such a way that all kinds of other things need to be dealt with and entered into with council to implement it. Most notably, site plan agreements, subdivision agreements, condominium agreements. So that's how it all comes together, but it's all tied to the rezoning request.
But
and that's how it's going to work.
But if we fail to approve it because of a height restriction and the OP allows the height, we're probably in trouble at LPAT. So I'll just pass that by. The comment I wanted to make was just a real situation. And the Marriott has been mentioned, and that's the big high building we see. But their next proposal to us is for the condominiums that are going to be on the waterfront. And I think our current bylaw allows 4-story buildings. And the Marriott has been grandfathered to allow to build on the footprint of the old Peyton House, which is about 10 feet from the water. Therefore, they're proposing 4-story buildings 10 feet from the water. So we have to be careful we don't get caught in that. And that's why I'm saying exercise caution. When you define a height, you have to define where it applies, I think. But thank you.
Councillor Hayes.
Thank you. Through you, I should say that in a habitable area, it's a hard limit for me to go beyond the bottom of the window ledge being reached by our area fire department. So that'll be something that I'm looking for. The tree line is something essential, and I think that nothing should be more than 2 stories in the first tier from the water. So the first thing that you see from the water should never be higher than 2 stories. And that's what I'm thinking for the development.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. As I sit with my contractor's hat on a little bit, I recognize that sometimes we just pick a number and we don't actually think about the construction process. And so while I appreciate the concerns of saying, for instance, 50 feet or 40 feet, whatever the number is, I think it's also important for council to recognize, again, the construction process. So the reality for me now is that, oh, Nick makes sense. Sorry, Nick, but you do the math and you realize, and putting all of the other components in, and the fact that we don't house people in 9-foot ceilings any longer. We haven't done that for many, many years. So looking at that type of conversation, the recommendation of 16 meters or 52 feet, I would approve. I also agree that we have to, see where those locations land. Concerning the fire department, I have to be careful with my wording, but the fire situations were supposed to be taken care of by the developer of the time for Red Leaves. And that was for the whole community of Minett, including a fire hall and a ladder truck. That didn't occur. That doesn't necessarily mean, in my mind, that our municipality shouldn't engage in further discussions with other municipalities. This goes to, for instance, Gravenhurst has had in the past asked for assistance from Ramera, which had the closest ladder truck at that time. It's a bigger discussion, and maybe it's a discussion within the district that we don't have to take this on by ourselves, but I don't want to restrict us to saying, well, we can only do what our fire department is able to do, because I don't have those answers, but I do know that it was something that was supposed to be put in place. And in fact, I would say that we kind of let the community of Minett down by not enforcing some of those things coming forward. I do wonder later on, and that's a different conversation, I guess, but what we do ask of the applicant, because often developers do come forward with added benefit to the community. So that's a bigger conversation, but I don't want to limit things. I'm just going back to the construction techniques. 52 feet works for me at this point.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to suggest that what we are talking about here is the 16 meters that Mr. McDonald suggested. And so the recommendation that the buildings up to 16 meters are permitted, and that includes mechanical equipment. I see Councillor Roberts shaking his head. Do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I'm supportive of the 16 meters, but in the applicable area. So I don't know how, I don't support 16 meters on the waterfront. So I that's what I would like to, know exactly where those 16 meters will be.
Okay, so Mr. McDonald, can you bring us back a draft that incorporates some sort of options for that? Or I'm not quite sure how to say that, but, and I see that Mayor Harding wants to speak after you.
Certainly, Chair Bridgman, I could turn my mind to how I can provide some additional direction. As mentioned, there already are a couple of policies in here that talk about low rise being at the waterfront and higher in behind. I can certainly reinforce that in the next draft, along with spelling out what exactly would be required in some type of height plan that would support a master planning exercise as well. So I will give that some thought.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. I guess I'm trying to, we call it the waterfront zone, we call it the back zone. There's a marina down there that is going to want to potentially put up, we talk about having boats going in and out of the water. You want to rack boats 3 stories high to solve a docking problem. You might be above 50 feet. I'm concerned a little bit about what we call waterfront. I don't even know how high the existing Cleveland's house is. I can tell you what I really don't like. And again, a 75-foot high building sitting on a cliff, which is that of the Marriott right now. So, and I don't think anybody wants to do that. So I look to Nick to help us pick numbers and development plans to go forward. But anyway, again, when a residential cottage in a waterfront zone can be 11 meters, we're only asking for an additional floor really for a commercial zone. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. So I think what we have here is 16 meters, and then Mr. McDonald is going to work in wording that will protect that quote waterfront area. I know we need definitions, etc., but as a general concept, it's low build at the waterfront and can be higher further back. So can I see who agrees with that going into this draft OPA? Madam Clerk? You good?
Oh, no.
Yeah, Councillor Hayes, are you against this? She's for. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. The next one is implementation. So indicate the approval of a rezoning or site plan cannot occur in the Minett Resort Village until all the requirements of section C1.7.1 and C1.7.2 have been completed to the township's satisfaction, and that a traffic impact study be added to the list of the requirements. So I think we've been talking about this as we've gone through our recommendations. Any comments from anyone? Okay, then Councillor Jaglowitz.
I do have a comment just to bring up later, Madam Chair. I have no problem with this section, but I'd like to see some part of this brought forward before we pass this OPA. So I will be bringing it up under the last item of Mr. McDonald's report. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. In terms of this recommendation, all those in favor? Madam Clerk, you good? Okay, thank you. All right, so now we're on to dockage and recommendation 7. All existing and approved boat slips on the land subject to the OPA 56 be counted, confirmed, and this number is the cap on the number of boat slips permitted. So that's the recommendation in front of us. Any comments? Councillor Jaglowitz?
Just a clarification, Madam Chair. A good number of those slips have a hold on them pending a boat study. Will that flow through, or are we just giving approval to those without that? So maybe that could just be clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. No, those ones on hold are approved. I would say to you, I know that Mr. McDonald captured Cleveland's house, and certainly over the years, I watched their docks get more and more and more. I believe, Mr. Pink, would you like to comment on the Cleveland's house docks?
I'm referring to the Wallace Bay docks.
Thank
Wallace
you.
Marina docks.
Yeah, you can answer the Wallace Marina one too.
Okay. Yes, I can confirm the zoning that was approved on the Wallace Marine property is still subject to a hold. The OP wouldn't be able to revoke that zoning approval, so it is in place. It would flow through. The only comment I would add, and I would note when Mr. McDonald and I started analyzing all the existing docks in the bay, it became somewhat of a challenge reviewing air photos and prior approvals. I think what just to float an idea by committee, it is essentially the same principle. Rather than being hung up on the number per se, whether it's 215, 275, or 280, it can be a challenge to calculate a precise dock slip when you get into water depths and true ability to access and ingress every dock in the bay. I think an alternative may be to simply identify that all existing and approved legal docks be recognized, and any further increases be subject to those requirements in the current draft of further voting impact study and future council approval. In that way, there's not a debate or an argument, and also, frankly, much more administratively easy for staff to administer future permits or future applications, so we don't have to count all the docks in the bay. So just a suggestion that rather than being hung up on the number, that we recognize everything that's legally in place, legally been approved, and going forward, those restrictions will be in place on any new docks.
Okay, so that would include all the docks in Minett, commercial or private or whatever. Just to clarify that too. All right, any more comments on that? Then I'm going to ask to vote on approving recommendation number 7. All in favor? Madam Clerk? Okay. Okay, so recommendation number 8 is recommended that staff housing be developed in the resort village to support any new resort related development. We have any discussion on that? So is that, I think my question, Mr. McDonald, is that's a hard, you have to have staff housing on your property.
That's correct. The way it was written before, it left it a little bit open to interpretation, and we certainly heard loud and clear that this is a key matter of interest. So yes, it's a hard requirement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jagowitz.
Once again, just a clarification. You say it's clear, but the way I read this is that if I had a resort on the water, I could then pick another area in the resort village to have my staff accommodation. I don't have to have it on site of the resort. It could be a totally disassociated property. Is that your intention, or is it just the wording is not unclear?
Mr. McDonald?
I guess in response, we don't know where future property boundaries are going to be. In my mind, the idea is that the staff housing is in the Minett Resort Village, and that's it. I don't think we can go any further because we don't know where future property boundaries are going to be.
You're still muted, Councillor Kelly?
Sorry, I didn't hear you call my name. Thank you. Through you. A couple of quick questions. I assume support means fully support, that it would be independent of the need to park people anywhere else. And is it relevant that it's silent as to who pays to develop this and manage this housing? I'm just not clear on that.
Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, I think in answer to your second question first, obviously not obviously, it would certainly be my thinking that the developer would be responsible for providing this housing, developing it, building it, managing it, and working out any kind of deal with whoever's living there as appropriate. It's completely out of the township's hands. This is something that's privately done, but it's required by the township.
Okay, Mayor Harding.
Thank you, and I agree with this recommendation wholeheartedly. The only one question I ask is there an opportunity to include supportive language to increase a staff housing complement to address many of the other staff housing issues within the township of Muskoka Lakes? I've used this analogy before. I would love to see somewhere in Muskoka Lakes what I'll call a Melrose Place, a number of housing units, maybe its own on-site bar that allows people who are in seasonal employment necessarily, a place where that they don't have to be living downtown and affecting other people, that we could create it. So maybe it's its own gated community that goes in there. But I'm just wondering if there's even possibility to, as we look at prescriptive language, that the development must support that, but some enhancements to encourage development of additional staff housing. I'll look at Mr. McDonald, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's certain. That's a great idea. I know it's been a long-standing issue, and I do recall you raising this earlier. So yes, we can come up with that encouragement language in the next draft.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, then I'm going to ask for a vote to approve recommendation number 8. All in favor? I think that's unanimous again, Madam Clerk. Okay, thank you. And then recommendation number 9, which we've already talked about, I know, is the strengthening of the language in the OPA. And I think, would you like to speak to this now, Councillor Roberts? Or not? I thought that you had mentioned it before.
Yes, I did, and I'm very supportive of this, and I think this is where we've really got to focus on in terms such as generally, encourage, discourage, appropriate. We've got to replace some of this verbiage with specifics. So I'm really encouraged with this, and I will be focusing on that in maybe a supplement, an additional version of this document. But we get caught up in OPA so many times because we use the word generally encourage, but they are needed in some places. All right, so I'm very supportive of this one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair. I too am in support of the concept of this. However, I'm worried about the implementation. The wording here says that it needs to be clear. Well, I don't know what that means. So what I would like to see, if it's possible for the next meeting, just a list of all the places that these permissive type wishy-washy words are used and what they're being replaced with. So we have an idea of what's happening, because I agree it's probably not appropriate to say shall in all cases, but rather than us having to scour the documents, possibly there could be a list prepared and what Mr. McDonald's recommendation is for tightening them up. I think that would help a lot. Thank you.
So perhaps I could suggest that when the next draft comes back, that is highlighted somehow. Director Pink, I know, or Mr. McDonald, rather than having to prepare a separate report next meeting, can we incorporate that into the next draft that shows the changes? I don't know who wants to take. Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, very quickly. Yes, we can make that happen, and certainly I'll speak to it when it comes back to this committee. And just as a complete aside, I just did that with the entire official plan. I scoured the whole thing looking for generally, encourage, may, and shall, and I looked at every one of them to try to figure out which word should be used. So you'll see that in the official plan when you get that back as well.
So supplementary. Yeah, I'm more interested. I understand where you're going to make the change, but I'm also interested where you didn't make the change. So I think the list, if you've created that, the list shouldn't be difficult, should it? Would it? Like you would indicate that I left encouraged in for this reason, right? So we have an opportunity to say we disagree or we agree. Thank you.
So I'm trying to save another report here because I know how busy everybody is. Yes, Councillor Jagowitz. Let's see if Mr. McDonald can maybe answer that question when he brings everything back. Mr. McDonald?
Yep, that's perfectly. I think that's a good plan, and it's not a lengthy document, so it wouldn't be too difficult. But I will make sure every word is carefully justified and thought through.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts?
Thank you. Just a follow up to that. Yeah, I was leading on Councillor Jagowitz. I was confused what was changed and what wasn't changed from the last version. So there's two parts to that. I'd like to see track changes for the next version. And I'm supportive of Councillor Jagowitz. What wasn't changed from the suggestions that many people have made? Thank you.
Okay, I think that's been noted. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to bring to council's discretion here is in our dog bylaw, it says shall is mandatory and not discretionary. And I want that in there so that we know that it's you shall do this or you shall not do this. And that's one of the things I want in there. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sure that's been duly noted also. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Just one quick issue. I'm trying to find it in Mr. McDonald's report, but I don't see it. I'm sure I read it somewhere last night. I'm curious about the process of doing the basically traffic impact or the community impact study. I know I read it last night somewhere, and I just can't put my hands on it right now, that the responsibility is that of the developer. But I'm curious to know how that works, where the developer has responsibility for ultimately making those upgrades, but presumably doesn't have the authority to make decisions about twinning a bridge at Port Sandfield. And so I don't understand the process and whether that's something we need to consider in this particular document or not.
Okay, thank you. So can I ask you to just hold that question for a minute, Councillor Kelly, and we can finish off with recommendation 9, which is strengthening the document and all of that. So I just need a formal vote on this. So nothing else to do with recommendation 9. Can I see approval? Who is in favor of this? Okay, thank you very much. And then I know we have other matters here, so I'm going to ask you, Mr. McDonald, would you like to consider that sort of your first and second comments on that, and then we'll get back to Councillor Kelly's question?
Certainly, Chair Bridgman. I just wanted to add a couple of points to the memorandum, and I think Ms. Bustard in her presentation responded to these and indicated that they were going to be doing some work. So I just wanted to bring this committee attention to the committee that there is some floodplain mapping that does have an impact potentially on the concept plan. So basically I'm saying, you know, look at that, make sure you incorporate that in your planning, and they indicated that they will. And the second thing is when we were all looking at the concept plan, it had some pretty good detail closer to the waterfront, but the further away you got, it was a little less detailed and a little bit more fuzzy. So I'd be a little happier if I saw some more detail on that. And as Paula indicated at the outset of this meeting, they're in process of doing that. So that's all I wanted to bring to the committee's attention.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Councillor Hayes, I want to get back to Councillor Kelly, but I won't leave this if your comment is to do with what Mr. McDonald just spoke about. So please go ahead if it is.
Okay, through you. I'd like to add to the concept plan that we would be respectful of local history and maintain, rebuild, or replace to honor our past. And a good example of that is Windermere House, where they replaced it and they have a facade on the front that honors the old, but inside everything is brand spanking new. And if we could do that with developments that we have, we would be having our hand to the past and our eyes to the future.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz, are you on this topic right now?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair. I believe that the second statement that Mr. McDonald makes is a good start, but I don't think it goes far enough. As you will be aware, we're now operating under what was known as OPA 34, and that plan for this area it not only included concept plans, but it also included phasing plans. And I believe a development of this size requires something more visual for us to look at. And I would like to suggest for the next meeting, and it should be added to the OPA, some idea of where this 2,000 unit density is going to appear in the full build out. So we have to have a full build out of the plan, not a plan showing 500. And then we need a phasing as to how it's to be implemented. In my view, that's critical. If this was an OPA brought forward by a developer, we would ask for that. I know this is ours. And let me just, this is probably, with your permission, Madam Chair, is one thing I'd like to say that ties into this, and this is probably a good place. I was exposed to Mr. Goldhar on a couple of occasions, and some of you will remember we had this joint steering committee that met for 2 years. I was not a member, but I sat in on a lot of the meetings. And at one of the meetings back in, I believe, March of 2019, Mr. Goldhar was at the front presenting a concept plan, and Ms. Bustard was at the back. And he presented a very convincing argument of his plan for this area. And it included a resort that did not have any condominiums. That was his preference, but all the units were owned by the resort. He did qualify to say there might be some need for some condominiums if it was financially viable. So 2 years passed, and we've been working on this OPA, and this OPA provides for everything in Minett to be condominium style. some of it resort commercial, some of it full residential, and somewhere in between, resort-related residential. So I had an opportunity about 5 months ago to meet with Mr. Goldhar one-on-one. And I asked him, I said, why did you change your plan? He said, Frank, I didn't. My plan is the same. I plan to redo Cleveland's House to its former glory, and it will operate as a resort fully owned. And I don't see that in this document. And I would suggest that that should be phase one. If that's still his plan, and I hope it is, I would certainly endorse it. And I'd like to see that as phase one of this plan. And then the full services, the residential, be later on phases. So I know we can't deal with this today, but I hope somebody would go back and see. But I think it's mandatory for the next meeting that we see visually the full build out of this plan. And all you have to do is take a look at legacy. And I don't know what the hell those people who voted for that were thinking. I assume they didn't see what was happening. And I feel we may be in the same position. Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me that opportunity to say that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. And I think somewhat along Councillor Jagwood's lines regarding phasing, I guess, and I'm just flipping through the actual OPA, but if I remember, there was a comment, or I think we should have a comment, that at no particular point, I'm not sure we need all resort commercial first and then add the residential. I think there needs to be a balance in there. And I'm not sure, I'll look to Mr. McDonald, if that percentage split accordingly should never get out of balance, meaning they could never build all of the residential first before the commercial. It always has to be either in tandem, never to exceed the allowable norms. But just wanted to make sure where we include that. Do we include that here in the OP, or are we actually going to do that in the zoning bylaw going forward?
Mr. McDonald.
So these are good questions, and I guess I'm going to back up a little bit. The reason I wanted to see more of I guess a full concept plan for the entire resort village was just so that I was satisfied that there was some thought given to how these areas would develop, but it would be conceptual only. I don't look at it as a master plan, which is something we'd require later. So they've indicated, the proponent have indicated that they'll undertake to do that. On the phasing side of things, I know that the current OP has a phasing plan in it. I'm not sure we need that right now. It will take some time. They have to do a lot of work. It's going to take many months, if not years, for them to do all of that work. And I wouldn't want to hold up the official plan amendment to find out what the phasing plan is 2 years from now. So I'll look to Ms. Buster to provide some thought to that before our next meeting in terms of what she's thinking. But we could include policies in the OPA that establish preferences if we wanted to, such as Cleveland House goes first. So I can think about that, but I'm not sure asking for a phasing plan now will really just delay the process. I think a concept plan is good, and then you get the phasing plan later and you can discuss and hash it over for many, many meetings when you have a much more detailed plan in front of you. We just don't have one. And I don't think we'll have one anytime soon. The best we'll get is a concept plan. So those are my thoughts, but.
Okay, all right. So Mayor Harding, did you want to follow up?
Yeah, thank you. And just Nick's comments, I understand, agree, and I think the concept plan at the high level is going to help everybody. I just want to circle back and say, Nick, I appreciate the insight, the recommendations to make this easy for us as a committee council to move this forward. I can tell you, I personally, based on development rights that exist today, I really want to continue to move this process forward and pass this OPA with appropriate public input, but as soon as possible. I do not want this to extend into 2022. We need to move this forward, and by doing so, significantly control the development, and we'll have many more touch points on site plans and zoning bylaws and phasing to be able to continue to implement public wishes to make sure it's an appropriate development. But this has been an eyesore for the public these days for a number of years, and like to try and hopefully start to fix this area. And again, I think the build out ultimately is going to be 20, 30, 40, 50 years between now and what this thing might ultimately be. So I just want to thank you for your work in that.
Okay, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know this has been a long time in the works. We've only had it a short time, but I think we should get it right. And this is the stage where we have the ability to do that. Once we pass this OP, then when we hit zoning and all the other phases, they can just refer to OP and say it's allowed. So we have to get this right. And I'd like to see that full build out. I'd like to see the phasing. It doesn't have to be done by architects or whatever, but it's the same kind of information that our planning people would ask for if this was a private OPA, ZBA combined. We'd be getting the whole package. And to spoon feed us and give us a document like this, and then we have to read these numbers and try to figure out what it'll look like, I think we need something more visual so we understand. Like, where are those 4-story buildings? Okay, I'm not saying you have to show every building, but show where they are, okay? Give us an idea of what we're actually approving. And I'm very serious on this. And I don't expect a lot of people to agree with me, but I will be looking for that at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I'm supportive of what Councillor Jaglowitz just said. And I just want to add a couple other comments. When I read through this report in detail, I need to go through it more, but there's other additions and changes that I would like to add to this report. And I know they're not going to get tabled between now and the next version. But there's a few of them that I would like to be discussed. And I think the opportunity will come during the next version. Is that correct? Like stuff like a climate change focus, green builds, etc.
Well, I believe anything's on the table when we get the next draft, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, just one other one I missed here at a glance left. I did like the idea of the fiscal impact study that was proposed by one of the delegates today, because we're taking this on. Anything that's not handled within Minett, the township is taking on, or the district on the cost. So a fiscal plan or impact study, I think, would be a great thing too. So thank you, Madam Chair.
So I need some clarification, because when I read this, it looked to me like if we have to upgrade Peninsula Road, it's the developer who pays for it. Am I mistaken on that? Or was I correct? Councillor, Mr. McDonald?
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, not to get into too much detail, but there could be a circumstance where there's a cost sharing of some kind, but that's way too premature to have that kind of conversation. But the basic principle here is any upgrades directly attributed to this development is the sole responsibility of the developer.
Thank you. Follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes, it was more than just the roads. What I'm thinking about is Friday Harbor. We do not want a Friday Harbor 2 where the township will have to pick it up and repair it. And I'm sure this developer will not allow that to happen, but things change. So that's what I was thinking, risk mitigation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think before I get to you, Councillor Mazan, I'm going to go back to Councillor Kelly, because he had asked that question quite a while ago, and we're now moving on to different things. So if you can remember, Mr. McDonald, Councillor Kelly's comments, or would you like a refresh?
I think I need a refresh on that one.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, and I did find it in the interim, the reference to the traffic study and the developer being responsible for the upgrades. But that covers the hard cost. Well, there's really two parts to the question. One is any traffic study and any proposed change under a traffic study is absolutely going to change the character of a lot more than just the resort village of Minett. It's going to be all the way down Peninsula Road and perhaps even into Port Carling. There's going to be a huge increase in the volume of traffic. There are a large number of people who have historically had family places backing onto that road. They are going to be impacted. I'm curious to know whether that is subject to any kind of an assessment. And I'm not just dollars and cents assessment, but I mean, how do we convince these people that this is as good for them as it is, as it is to for the people in the resort village directly? There's also some implication, and I think when it says a fiscal impact study, there's sort of an implication that perhaps the township is going to be responsible for some of the costs. So I'd like to make it absolutely clear. Maybe we've done that. Maybe your document already does that. Make it clear that the costs are fully borne by the developer, whatever they may be. I know there may be businesses that need to be relocated, for instance. I can think of two in particular that unless we try to continue to jam people through the narrowest road on earth with 2,000 additional cars every day, those businesses are going to have to look seriously at if they can continue where they are presently located. Those kinds of issues are huge issues, and they really aren't or shouldn't be, I don't think, the responsibility of the municipality. The nature of the character of that road and the people who back onto that road have long enjoyed this sort of luxury of long driveways into their place. I suspect some of them are not going to be too happy with some of the changes that might have to come. Now, I'm presuming, making the assumption that I have some idea what changes are necessary. Maybe I don't, but I think it's a fair bet that a lot of people are going to be impacted, and many of them are going to see it as a negative impact as a result of some of this stuff. And I think that to the extent there are costs associated, those are not the township's costs. That's it.
I'm going to let Councillor Mazan, I know you want to answer that, Councillor Harding, but let me just have Councillor Mazan speak first.
Thank you. I actually think it would be better if Mayor Harding is talking directly to Councillor Kelly's comments. I'm happy to go afterwards. So thank you.
Okay, Mayor Harding.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'm going to probably ask Mr. Pink to potentially speak to this, or Nick, but contemplated within any development, we're collecting development charges. So the developer is actually putting money aside for roads, for fire departments, for infrastructure. And that's why we're charging those fees up front every time a building permit is issued, everything new. So in theory, they are not going on the back of the existing taxpayers. There's supposed to be new money put aside, that we have local DCs and then also district-wide DCs to help cover off those future plots. And I know Township Muskoka Lakes, for those who remember or not, we did a DC review, I think a few years ago, and we are charging the full extent possible here at the township. The district had reduced some development charges, understanding that their concept with some of the urban centers was the greater the development, theoretically in the future, you have an increased tax base and increased revenues to help offset some of those other costs. But I do know district is also looking at, will be looking at DC charges going forward as well. So I wanted to put that forward. Generally speaking, I think it's contemplated in here that the developer is responsible for the studies and everything else for their development. But 20 years from now, should a road need to be upgraded, theoretically, we should have been collecting enough money to be able to upgrade that road. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Councillor Mazan.
Thank you, and through you. I suspect this is perhaps a process question or looking for some assurance that we've had many of these meetings. And I think this today has been very helpful in talking about a lot of the bigger items. And I've appreciated not only the input, but the discussion today. Some of the members of the public and others have had submissions previously and have ideas and suggestions. And I just wanted to be sure that those would also be captured and brought forward, either in the OPA, or I think Councillor Roberts was suggesting a list of items that have been discussed or contemplated as part of that next document. So we know we're not missing any ideas. And specifically, I'm looking to the Friends of Muskoka MLA submission that they gave to us yesterday or today, point number 12. They talk about these additional items. And I think even reference that some of these things were actually in the OPA 34, and can they just be brought forward? So I think I heard Councillor Roberts talk about a redlined version of these OPAs coming forward, but I just want to make sure that we're not losing anything as we go through this process. So I'm not sure if that's a question for Nick, a general comment. Give me some assurance, because it's a lot when you're sitting on this end, and I certainly don't want to be missing something significant.
Mr. McDonald?
Through you, Chair Bridgman. I guess at the end of the day, I read everything that gets submitted. I listen and carefully consider everything that's being said, and I produce something based on my professional judgment. So I can assure you that I will look and consider everything that's being submitted, but no, I'm not going to include everything that's being asked, because in the end, I have to make a judgment call on what makes the most sense and what's in the public interest. I do know there were a few items raised by the Friends of Muskoka that they want me to think about. I will think about those things and see if there's a way we can incorporate some of their suggestions in the plan. And I guess that's all I can really say. You've hired me to do this work, and I'm going to do the best I can to bring something back that I think is supportable and works for the community. And we can certainly have a conversation when you see the next draft on anything that anyone thinks may be missing within the document.
And thank you. Just a quick follow-up to that. And in no way am I suggesting, I know you have the unenviable task of trying to listen to all parties and craft appropriate policies. It's just, as I'm listening today and I hear additional items, I just want to make sure that they're at least being seen, heard, understood, contemplated, and that's captured in a future document somehow as we go through this process. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much. Further to what Mayor Harding said about the actual development charges, at the moment, that's a district road, and the district is only charging 50% of what they should be charging, and that we tried to get that straightened out and it was voted down. But so the taxpayers in the district will be paying 50% of that until we get the development charges up to where they should be. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think developers maybe should be paying a little bit more on that. And as far as heritage, that bridge is a heritage bridge. It's always been basically single lane. I wouldn't like to see that change, even if they had to put lights there. But it's something that it will change the whole character of the whole community going up through there. So we got to be very, very careful on what we come up with. Thank you.
Well, just a quick comment, seeing as that's my bridge and I use it all the time. It's already very, very busy. I can't imagine being able to cope with the traffic of a new development with a single lane bridge there, Councillor Edwards. I don't have an answer for you, but I will tell you, it is really busy. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I've actually thought maybe we should direct traffic up through Rosso. Just a quick follow-up on the development charges. Development charges levied today and assessed on a project that, as the mayor has suggested, is going to take 20 years or 30 years. I hope they're somehow inflation protected, or maybe they're only levied in and assessed as the work gets completed. But boy, if we're going to collect dollars and try to cover the costs, I'd be curious to know whether in our history, do the development charges actually cover the expense? That's point number one. Point number two, I much prefer Mr. McDonald's approach to this, which is specifically forget about development charges. The responsibility for those costs are solely those of the developer. That's the right way to handle it as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. And I want to respond to the input from Mr. McDonald on going through all information provided and making a decision. And I really welcome that. Mr. McDonald and Director Pink, they are the professionals. They know what will fly and will not fly. But on the other hand, and I've watched this for 4 years, that people in groups will make suggestions. And it appears to me that those suggestions are not always responded to. Now, there are some that are outside the boundary of acceptability, but the ones that are tangible, I would ask that Mr. McDonald, when he considers it, the ones he does not consider, that we're made aware of why that consideration was, on his part, was they were not included, so that we can make the decision if they should be included or not included based on professional advice. So that's what I'm asking. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, I'm not sure what that does to your workload or if that's even possible.
I guess what in response to that, I recognize the importance of this. So I will make an effort the next time we meet to identify what changes I didn't make and why. So I will do what I can to do that. Mr. Pink and I haven't talked about what the next meeting looks like or even when it is and whether a report goes with that or not. So there's a few things still to discuss. But if there's something that I feel the community thinks is important and I somehow don't think I can include it, I will raise it. So that's on me and I will endeavor to do that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. Two things. It's interesting, if anyone is interested in looking at the traffic study report done for the Marriott, and Councillor Kelly mentioned it, certainly 141 was part of that bigger discussion. So I think it's interesting if people were to actually look at some of the past information, some of their answers, questions would be either give you more questions, but there's a lot of good answers there is what I would suggest. And also, Chair Bridgman, I am really late for my next appointment, so I'm going to have to excuse myself from the meeting.
Okay, thank you for letting us know, Councillor Nishikawa. Okay, I don't see any other questions at this point. Mr. McDonald, do you have everything you need to move into the next draft?
Yes, I do, Chair Bridgman.
Barb, I think you put yourself on mute.
I did, sorry. Okay, we just have to amend the resolution just slightly. And then I believe that it doesn't happen often in planning, but we might wrap up before our designated time. Okay, let me try this again. Moved by Councillor Zavitz, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved that Special Planning Committee recommend to Council that a revised draft of Official Plan Amendment number 56 be prepared for committee's consideration based on the directions contained within Appendix I of Report Plan dash 2021-15 as amended at the Special Planning Committee meeting of August the 6th, 2021. Any comments? All in favor? Carried? We're good. Okay, thank you. That carries. So maybe Mr. Pink or Mr. McDonald, can you just, and maybe for the people listening in, just where the process is going from here? Just a quick recap, maybe Mr. Pink?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Bridgman. So after the passage of that resolution, Mr. McDonald and I will work on a revised draft of the official plan amendment based on the directions and those revisions made at today's meeting. And we will return to future planning committee meeting with that revised draft for your future consideration.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you, Mr. McDonald, for your time, and thank you to our delegates who I expect are listening in now. As I said, it was a different platform that we had to use today for this meeting. And to everyone else, we look forward to getting that back and getting the draft back. And so I believe that this is now going to end the meeting, and now I need to find my motion. There it is. To end the meeting. So moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Hayes. Be it resolved that Special Planning Committee adjourn at 12:43 p.m. and the next regular meeting of Planning Committee will be held on Thursday, August 12th, 2021 at 9 a.m. electronically from the Council Chambers, Municipal Offices in Port Carling, Ontario. All in favor? Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone, and have a really, really great weekend.
Peter.
And we'll see. Oh,
Peter, were you wrestling with yourself there? Because I seen the headlock and that. I just wondered.
okay. See everybody next week.
I hope you win.
Bye.